said, my name is Alain Impellizzeri. Remember Alain, that's fine. I've been in Ireland a long time. I coordinate the Centre of New Acropolis in Ireland with a team, some of which are in the school. I've talked about these subjects a few times already in the past. Actually, in November, we talked specifically about the Stoics. Well, two of the main Stoics, which was Marcus Aurelius and Seneca. This is a wider perspective, and more looking at the convergence between Buddhism and Stoicism. So historically, we see that when the world is unstable and impermanent, like it is today, various schools of philosophy have looked at answers and solutions to manage their troubled periods of time, with one key objective, which was to find again their inner stability. And clearly, 2020 and 2021, in facing an unstable world, partly caused by COVID-19, but not only, because I think that the instability is there for a long time, but COVID probably brought it forward in a more transparent way. Buddhism and Stoicism propose a converging way that leads us towards the inner being, the inner self. These are just ways or words to help us understand that which is within ourselves. We can call it the self, the inner being. The Tibetans sometimes call it the voice of the silence. The key point here is the notion or the concept of impermanence allows us to become aware to what extent the world changes constantly. As the Buddhists would say, we're born, we live, and we die. And this will start to be expressed in a slightly different way and very converging way around the 5th, 6th century BC in the East with Buddhism and in the West with Stoicism. These philosophers and philosophies had a clear awareness that the world was volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The famous VUCA research that has been done in the last couple of decades, which people have talked a lot about during the last year or so. And we can see it that this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity has been clearly experienced during the last 12 months, or a bit less than 12 months, through this pandemic. We have experienced them in a very powerful, sometimes shocking way, and not just localized to one part of the world, but in this case, it has been worldwide. But if we study these two philosophies, we will find out that Buddhism and Stoicism have both brought, in their own time of instability, which they tended to emerge, both of them in time of instability in India and in Greece first and in Rome later for the Stoics, a profound reflection on the necessity for inner stability and the possibility to create an order within ourselves. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote the following: to resemble the rock or promontory, he says in the writing, or the rock, against which the waves constantly break, he remains standing, and around him the swelling of the wave comes to sleep. Resonating the same idea in Buddhism, the Buddha says the following: by valiant courage, a vigilant mind, self-control, and renunciation, the sage creates an island that no wave can submerge. It is this image of a fortress, an inner fortress, a lighthouse perhaps, a rock, an island of stability that we can all build within ourselves. Buddhists and Stoics invite us to a philosophy that could be summarized in these following concepts. One, inner freedom, the ability to count on oneself, to know ourselves better, to differentiate what's essential to what is secondary or accessory, what is worth experiencing or not, what we should fight for or not, and above all, the capacity to face our difficulties, to face adversity from that inner center, that inner strength. In summary, to trust, to be confident on our own inner resources instead of always depending on that of others. And so by reading these thoughts voluntarily simple and powerfully clear, is like having a conversation with a friend philosopher that has come to give us an advice which is individual and universal at the same time. Their recommendation is to reflect on them and above all, to practice them. Epictetus, in his writings, already in his time, talks about the apprentice philosopher who was complaining about the fact that they were mocking them or making fun of them. He explained that it was normal, and he gave an analogy to explain it. It is like the shepherd leading his sheep on the land, on the grass, and when he brings them back to the stable in the evening, he doesn't ask them if they liked the grass they ate. No, he will look at the quality of his wool and of the milk that they produce. This will prove that the grass was good. And he says, philosophical teachings are the same. It is not a question to have a long discourse, discussion, and debate about philosophy, but it is about practicing their teachings, Epictetus said. And so we have to masticate, swallow, transform what we have learned into action, which will prove that we have understood. Very powerful. Another story, but a Buddhist one, tells or says from Buddha, we think, that a warrior was just struck by an arrow. When the doctors arrived, before being treated, the patient started to ask about the angle in which the arrow was sent, the quality, what is it made of, how was it, in which way was it built, what was its style. But Buddha says, if we investigate all the characteristics of the arrow, the patient risks to die very quickly. It is better to leave the doctor to extract the arrow and to treat the patient so that he can heal quickly. And so, for the Buddhists, as well as the Stoics, what's urgent is not the accumulation of knowledge or intellectual knowledge, but the practice of a few but clear principles of life. And they insist these practices tend to be of a mental nature. As they say, that is what is most difficult is to master the mind. It is like a fiery horse that tends to go in all directions at the same time. So Buddhism and Stoicism propose two complementary paths. One, the one of the middle way, Buddhism, and the Stoics, how not to become an obstacle to oneself. And I say that again, how not to become an obstacle to oneself. And I'm sure many of you have read Buddhism and have heard about the concept of middle way, but I'm going to explain it anyway a little bit. You probably know that the essential teachings of Buddhism refer to pain or suffering, because Buddhism realizes that every human being will experience a form of dissatisfaction which transforms itself into pain. And that pain becomes lasting or long-lasting. When pain, becomes lasting, it becomes what they call suffering. But they say that this suffering can make us aware of our own vulnerability. And what they are proposing is that we question ourselves on the possibility to free ourselves from that suffering. To do so, they propose the Eightfold Path. And this Eightfold Path is a practice, and I will try to briefly explain what these 8 practices are. They divide it into 3 sections: ethics, mental discipline, and wisdom. And so they are mental, emotional, and physical practices to free ourselves from suffering and to achieve what they describe as philosophical happiness. The Greek will call that eudaimonia, and the Stoic will talk more about Ataraxia, which I'll briefly mention later on. They say that it is by the observation that our suffering comes from the attachment to our personal ego. But at the same time, the Buddhists insist that we realize that we possess within ourselves a higher consciousness which is watching us act and can master ourselves. This higher self can master our suffering. If we do this, they say, we can become active agents of our own transformation. And Buddha says the following: by oneself, in truth, is evil done. By oneself, one is soiled. By oneself, evil is avoided. By oneself, in truth, one is purified. Purity and impurity are personal. No one can purify others. And so the Buddhists propose this eightfold path. As I said, it is the 4th noble truth. I'm not going to go through each of the noble truths, only the Eightfold Path in the framework of this short talk on Buddhism and Stoicism, but I want to mention them from the point of view of their practice, which often enough is not always well understood, perhaps. The 4 noble truths talk about suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the last, which is the Eightfold Path, the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. a path made up of 8 successive stages, they say. It explains how to move forward on the path to liberation and to experiencing stable and lasting happiness in life. And so they talk about wisdom, ethics, and mental discipline. Wisdom combines right understanding and right thinking. If you search online the Eightfold Path in Buddhism, they'll give it to you. In ethics, they talk about right speech, right action, and the right way of living. And mental discipline includes right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation. I will explain each of them briefly so that to give you an idea and hopefully motivate you to search a bit further, not only the understanding, but perhaps their practice. The first one, right understanding. And they say that right understanding is understanding the teachings. That's it. Understanding them, not interpret them, not speculate about them, but understanding them. Right thinking, they say it's free thinking, stripped of greed, jealousy, anger, hatred, and cruelty. A thought that is meant to be an expression of the heart, compassion, and benevolence. So it is really going beyond our natural tendency towards judgmental behavior. Each of these things that I'm describing briefly, we could have a talk on each of them, and above all, understanding its practice. But I think you'll understand well what they are trying to tell us. Ethics, right speech. They say it consists above all in expressing oneself in a noble, true, and authentic manner, while avoiding causing suffering to those to whom one is speaking. Avoiding telling lies, slandering, speaking in an hateful way, rude manner, uttering frivolous or futile words. Only that, just that, we can pay attention and practice. But already that will generate an enormous amount of attention, kindness, openness to oneself and to others. Right action. It is the action that makes us act with respect for others and for ourselves, avoiding creating suffering both for ourselves and others, refraining from killing, stealing, lying, behaving illegitimately, refraining from addictive products such as alcohol and drugs. Good God, we can't go to the pub anymore, but we can't anywhere at the moment. Just joking. Now, but you have to understand in context. But it's interesting, the first part, it is the action that makes us act with the respect for ourselves and others, avoiding creating sufferings. But they don't refer only to people, but also to nature, to every form of life. Each of these 8 elements require introspection, reflection, and how, as I said, to masticate, swallow, translate into action. Okay? As the example of the Stoics in that case, but it's the same. The right way of living, it relates to professional activity, but also to social life and relationships with others. And they say avoid professions which causes suffering for all living beings, which cause pollution, which are toxic, dangerous. And I saw in one writing, trade in weapons, drugs, products harmful to health. There's a lot in that again. You need to translate that in 21st century language. But at the same time, once we have done translation into today, it is easy to understand and certainly easy, not easy. Theoretically easy to practice. Everything I'm saying is theoretically easy to practice. But in fact, most of these practices sound simple, but require quite a bit of concentration, effort, and above all, sustaining that effort over long periods of time, i.e. life. Last but not least, mental discipline. The right effort. It is the effort to work on oneself in order to become better and to avoid suffering. There's also the effort of practicing with others, striving to create together the condition for a practice which allows to move forwards together on the path of life. Right attention, also called full consciousness. It consists in being fully present, here and now, being attentive to your body, to your breathing, to the sensations, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, without running away from them or wanting to hold them back, but simply letting them pass through us. Be attentive to our state of mind so that the engagement in action is done with conscience. Last one, some call it right meditation or right concentration. You find both. And they say, it is the practice of concentration that is the source of all Buddhist practice. Right meditation is characterized, among other things, by the abandonment of the three main obstacles: ignorance, greed, and anger, of all harmful states and conditioned states, anything that's harmful to us and to others, obviously. A return to the present moment, a detachment from our mind and thoughts, and to let go our personal conscience, that you say the me, myself, and I, as I often call them in English. Okay? As you can see, in a synthetic way, I'm trying to bring to your attention key elements in this case, in the Eightfold Path. So, in Stoicism, they suggest that we need to become responsible of our actions. And they say how not to be an obstacle to oneself. The teachings of Stoicism, they are divided in three different disciplines: physics, logic, and ethics. The spiritual practices of these three disciplines are the examination of one's own conscience, the contemplation of nature and its laws, and the use of reason, by bringing everything to the causes, to a neutral observation of reality. To learn to meditate on the nature of the passing of time and death, and to learn to master our passions. You need to understand that for the Greek, the word passions meant to act without thinking. And I will use quotes from Epictetus and Seneca and Marcus Aurelius to explain a few things. So I'll give them the way to express directly instead of me trying to explain. And I'll explain a little bit afterwards. Epictetus says the following: To accuse others of their misfortune is an act of ignorance. Or, the act of an ignorant person. To reject them on oneself is to begin to learn. So to take ownership of them. Not to accuse others or oneself of them is to be wise. I'll say it again. They're sometimes a little bit more difficult to grasp immediately, the Stoics. They say, to accuse others of one's own misfortune, so to speak, is the act of an ignorant person. Ignorant means that doesn't know. Don't understand ignorant in the Dublinese sense of that word. To reject them on oneself, so to take ownership for them, is to begin to learn, or take responsibility if you prefer. Not to accuse others or oneself of them is to be wise. For the Stoic, wisdom consisted in living in harmony with nature. And the wise is that individual which has become master of himself or herself. As they say, the greatest of freedom, it is that of mastering oneself. And Seneca says the following: to obey the gods is our freedom. To obey the gods is our freedom. The gods, to which is alluded to by Seneca, is what they call the laws of nature, the principles of life. It is a discipline of physics, understanding the laws of nature and life. And so they say, if we act in harmony with what is best in us, we're going to extract a power within ourselves that we can call virtue. Virtue literally means strength, positive strength. For the Stoic, they say, is how to act in line, in accordance to the laws of nature, by investigating them, by contemplating them. Thus, the branch of teachings of Stoics called physics, or physis, which literally means nature, the study of nature, the study of the principles of life, and how we live according to those principles of life. The essential teachings of Epictetus, and largely the Stoics in general, can be captured in the following sentence. Sorry. Epictetus says, there are things that depend on us. There are things that are not dependent on us. What depends on us are our values, our opinions, our thoughts, our behavior, therefore our actions, whatever we can control within ourselves. What does not depend on us are the body, material goods, reputation, dignity, and honors. All that does not depend on our own actions, but on external circumstances. And he says, following that, something quite powerful and again requires a bit of reflection. He says, you did not choose to be born as a prince or as a slave, but once fate has put you in such or such other circumstance, what is expected of you is that you play well the role that life has invited you to play. And he continues saying, You must not deliver the land from monsters, because you were not born Hercules or Theseus. But you can imitate them by freeing yourself from the formidable monsters that you carry within you. In you, there is a lion, a boar, a hydra, which is a snake with multiple heads. Try to control them, says Epictetus. Try to control the pain, fear, greed, envy, malice, laziness, and gluttony. And the only way to defeat these monsters is to have the gods in mind. And I refer you to the gods as the laws of nature in mind. Be loyal to them and obey them and obey their mandate. Meaning, obey, i.e., understand, live according to the principles of life. Marcus Aurelius, in his meditation, says the following. At dawn, when it costs you to wake up, have this thought in mind. It is to do the work of a human being that I am awakening to. So will I still be in a bad mood if I am going to do what I was born to do? And what was I born to do? Or have I been trained to lie down and keep warm under my blanket? Were you then born to give yourself pleasure? And after all, are you made for passivity or for activity? As you can see, life is always a question of choice. We either choose to go with the flow of life, or we choose to enable ourselves to become responsible for ourselves. And so when we feel laziness, but when the motivation is to accomplish good actions or a good action, that this motivation makes us get up in the morning so to accomplish our work, says the Stoic. And they suggest that we should ask ourselves this every morning. What action am I going to get up to? So you can see that in the Stoic vision, what is important is to take our place in the universe and to take place in something that is wider and bigger than ourselves, without paying too much attention to the small considerations. I'll translate this in modern English. Not focusing too much on the consideration of our personal comfort. In their method, the Stoic have an objective, which is happiness, like Aristotle or Socrates or Plato and many others before them and after them. But to reach happiness, they say that we need to reach what they call Ataraxia, is when the soul remains undisturbed no matter what the circumstances that we're going through. It is the absence of trouble of the soul, the absence of fear. In other words, they suggest, how can we remain balanced in the face of our circumstances? To do that, we have seen this in the quotes, particularly of Epictetus, there is what depends on us and what doesn't. Okay? So the key to Stoicism is to differentiate what depends on us to what doesn't depend on us. And simply learn to accept it. If I don't have a hold on it, and it is linked to my circumstances, I'm simply confronted to the desire to control it. We need to learn to let it go and focus on what we can control so that we can overcome. But there is a key, very important thing about this concept of acceptance, because it may sound passive, but it is not. Acceptance of things is not submission or not being submissive. Submission or being submissive is passive. They say that acceptance requires a strength of soul or strength of mind. Another word for it is fortitude, inner strength. And they say that the key or the essential key is in our views or opinions, as we call them. Marcus Aurelius says, everything is opinion and opinions depend on us. The word opinion means view, understanding, what I see from my perspective. Because we all have an opinion of what's happening to us, but also depends on us how we form that view of what's happening to us. Either we can take it as a victim or not. This leads us to question ourselves and realize that nothing has absolute value, but everything has relative value. And this relative value depends on the way we look at things. What's upsetting for one person doesn't upset another person. And it's possible that in the quotes I've used tonight from the Buddhist or the Stoic, some things will have resonated to you, some things may even have upset you, I don't know. But not the same things will resonate with you, and not the same things will upset you or enthuse you or motivate you, I don't know. That depends on us. It doesn't depend on what I said or didn't say, or what the Stoics said or didn't say. It is how we interpret it related to our circumstances and how we can translate and understand what has been said for ourselves and by ourselves. So just to point out that in reality, there is a huge subjectivity in what we are experiencing. We cannot say that what we experience is absolutely 100% objective. You can listen to the commentators about how they described the year we just passed, 2020. And it is varied, depends the perspective they have, how they feel being able to have the right attitude in the face of what life has brought to them. So Plato later would say that we will need to enter into a discipline of opinions. I would prefer to use it in modern way, to have an educated opinion, but realize that opinion nonetheless, therefore subjective. And Marcus Aurelius, in relation to that, says the following: the emerald does not lose its value for lack of praise. Things exist and are what they are, no matter how we look at them. And Epictetus says, at any painful idea, be careful to tell yourself you are an idea and you are not at all what you represent. So we can see that Eastern and Western philosophy invites us to enhance our consciousness, to extract ourselves from the focus of our own suffering, of our own small-mindedness, which tends to lead to feel like a victim, to enter into a form of slavery, if you wish, but above all, gives us a feeling of powerlessness. But what they are recommending clearly is that if we can do something, no matter how small or how great, we should do it. And so Buddhist and Stoic philosophy are pushing us, inviting us to ask the following questions. How can I make the world more beautiful, more just, more truthful, more authentic through my own behavior? Because they're trying to give us ownership again. We're regaining our ownership, so we are regaining our freedom by this perspective they are giving us. So, they say if I cultivate my own garden, the world will be better off with it. We have to have the will to take control, the will to master ourselves, they say. And so, to conclude a little bit, in this uncertain, confused world we are experiencing, where everything seems to be all over the place, we may wonder and ask ourselves how to act, even on a small scale, in a small way. And so, if I paraphrase the Stoic and the Buddhist, instead of protesting, instead of trying to be outraged or even demonstrating in the streets, we can stay positive and seek out interesting and useful initiative and actions that we can partner with. Act according to what is positive in itself. Act to transform the world around you, your environment. And they say at the end, and at the same time, remain humble. And like the Little Prince, if you know the Little Prince from Saint-Exupéry, take care of your own rose, it says in the book. If everyone grew their own little rose and had a fox as a friend, the world would be much better off. Let's start by taking action on what is within our reach. That is the fundamental message that we can see and extract in these 50 minutes of talk on Buddhist, from the Buddhist and the Stoics.